A single father and small business owner in Texas posted that he hadn't slept in 3 days, overwhelmed by the anxiety of a new regulation championed by Senator John Barrasso, prompting Representative Jasmine Crockett to turn a routine budget hearing into a referendum on whose American dream is being suffocated. Within an hour of the hearing, the clip was everywhere. It wasn't just another moment of political theater. It was the raw, unfiltered cry of exhaustion from every small business owner who ever felt buried by paperwork they couldn't understand. The video, cut and spliced on every social platform, showed two starkly different realities. The slick, smiling press photo of Senator Barrasso celebrating his bill, placed side by side with the words of Declan Hayes, a man on the brink. Political commentators who usually spoke in abstract terms about policy were forced to talk about a man named Declan. The term paper and pencil nightmare became a shorthand for the cavernous gap between the laws written in Washington, D.C. and the lives they irrevocably alter. 3 days before the hearing room became a national stage, Senator John Barrasso was enjoying the clean, sterile glow of a television studio. He sat across from a friendly anchor on a major news network, his posture perfect, his confidence radiating. He was discussing his signature legislative achievement, the Corporate Freedom Act. With the practiced ease of a physician explaining a simple procedure, he outlined the bill's virtues. "We are surgically removing the burdensome regulations that have acted like a tumor on our economy," Barrasso said, his hands gesturing with precision. "This is about cutting the red tape, about liberating our job creators to do what they do best: innovate, grow, and hire." The anchor nodded along, smiling. To Barrasso, the world was as simple as an operating room. You identify the problem, you make a clean incision, you fix it. The problem, as he saw it, was government overreach. His solution was freedom. After the segment, a young, eager aide handed him a tablet displaying the official press release from his office. The headline was bold: "Senator Barrasso's Corporate Freedom Act unleashes American enterprise." Below it were glowing quotes from the CEOs of several Fortune 500 companies and the heads of major industry lobbying groups. "They love it, Senator," the aide beamed. "The Wall Street Journal is calling it the most significant pro-business legislation in a decade." Barrasso scanned the release, a flicker of deep satisfaction in his eyes. He had delivered for his party, for his donors, for the big players who understood how the world really worked. The minor grumblings from fringe groups or smaller trade associations were just noise, the inevitable complaints from those who feared competition and change. He had done a good thing. He was a hero to American business. He folded his hands, feeling the solid, unshakable certainty of a man who believes his own press. At the same moment, hundreds of miles away in Dallas, Jasmine Crockett was on a Zoom call, listening. She wasn't listening to CEOs or lobbyists. She was listening to a woman named Brielle who ran a local bakery and was trying to figure out if she could afford to give her one full-time employee a raise. The conversation was about payroll taxes, the rising cost of flour, and the dream of maybe, one day, opening a second location. It was a world away from the sterile news studios and celebratory press releases. After the call, Crockett was scrolling through her briefing documents for the week when her legislative director, a sharp young woman named Alani, forwarded her an email with the subject line, "You need to see this." The email contained a link to a Facebook post. There was no slick graphic, no clever hashtag. It was just a wall of text written by a man named Declan Hayes. Crockett clicked on his profile and saw a picture of a tired-looking man in his 40s, smiling, with a young daughter on his shoulders. His business was called Lone Star Printworks. She began to read. "I haven't slept in 3 days," the post began. "I'm not looking for sympathy. I just need to say this somewhere. I'm a small business owner. I have 8 employees. I print signs, banners, t-shirts. I love what I do. I'm a single dad. My daughter, Rowan, is my world. And I feel like I'm about to lose everything because I can't understand a form. The Corporate Freedom Act was supposed to help us. That's what they said on the news. But my accountant just sent me the new quarterly compliance documents. It's 42 pages long. It wants to know the delineated workflow contribution percentage of each employee and requires a variable overhead cost projection that has to be updated monthly. If I get it wrong, the penalties are thousands of dollars. I've read it a dozen times. I called the helpline and was on hold for 2 hours before it disconnected. I can't afford a high-priced lawyer to decipher this for me. I just want to print t-shirts and pay my people and make sure my daughter has a roof over her head. This isn't freedom. This is a trap. I'm so tired. Crockett read the post once. Then she read it again. The weariness in Declan's words was palpable. It wasn't the fiery anger of political opposition. It was the quiet despair of a man being crushed by a system he was told was built for him. As a former public defender, she knew that feeling intimately. She had seen it in the eyes of countless clients who were lost in the labyrinth of the legal system, buried by paperwork and procedures designed to be incomprehensible. This was the same thing, just with a different letterhead. "Alani," she said into her phone, "find more. Find every post, every email, every call we've gotten about this bill. I want to see a pattern." Within 2 hours, the pattern was brutally clear. It was a flood. A dozen emails from her district alone. A barber in Fort Worth. A woman who ran a small IT consulting firm in DeSoto. A family-owned restaurant in Oak Cliff. Then Alani expanded the search, pulling in public posts from business owners across the country. The stories were all the same. Big corporations got a tax break and a simplified one-page form, while anyone with fewer than 50 employees was suddenly drowning in a sea of bureaucratic jargon, impossible compliance standards, and the paralyzing anxiety of ruinous financial penalties for a single mistake. Crockett looked at her weekly schedule. On Wednesday, there was a House Small Business Committee hearing. The topic was a routine budgetary review for the Small Business Administration. It was supposed to be a sleepy, procedural affair. She drew a sharp, dark circle around it. "Get me everything on the Corporate Freedom Act," she told Alani. "Every line. And get me the SBA's official guidance on it. I want to know if they even understand what this thing does. Cancel my afternoon appointments. I have some reading to do." The quiet determination of a lawyer building a case settled over her. This was no longer a routine hearing. It was a battlefield. The House Small Business Committee hearing room was exactly as mundane as expected. Polished wood, microphones, little plastic water bottles lined up in perfect rows. The witness sat at the center table. A man named Miles Thornton, the administrator of the Small Business Administrations. He was a career bureaucrat, a man whose entire demeanor screamed risk aversion. He was here to present his budget, answer a few questions, and escape unscathed. The committee chairman, a Republican from Ohio, opened the proceedings with a glowing tribute to the new economic landscape. "Thanks to the visionary leadership of my colleagues in the Senate, particularly Senator Barrasso, our nation's job creators have been unshackled," he declared. "Administrator Thornton, I trust the SBA is prepared to capitalize on this new era of prosperity." Thornton nodded, adjusting his microphone. "Yes, Mr. Chairman, we are working diligently to provide clear and concise guidance to help businesses navigate the new legislative landscape." One by one, members took their turns. A Democrat asked about minority-owned business outreach. A Republican asked about streamlining loan applications. The questions were softballs. The answers were pre-packaged paragraphs of bureaucratic non-speak. The words synergy, stakeholders, and robust framework were used frequently. The hearing droned on, a perfect portrait of Washingtonian inertia. Then, the chairman looked down his list. "The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Crockett, for 5 minutes. Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone. The room's sleepy energy shifted, just slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Administrator Thornton, for being here today." She began calmly, her voice even and measured. "Administrator, the official mission of the SBA is, and I quote, to aid, counsel, assist, and protect the interests of small business concerns. Is that correct?" "Yes, Congresswoman, that is correct," Thornton replied, looking relieved. "A simple opening question, and you would agree that protecting their interests includes protecting them from confusing and potentially ruinous regulations, would you not?" A slight pause. Yes, in principle, I would agree with that statement. Good, Crockett said, her eyes fixed on him. So let's talk about the Corporate Freedom Act, championed by Senator Barrasso. She let the name hang in the air for a moment. Are you aware of the specific compliance requirements this act places on businesses with, say, 12 employees? Thornton shifted in his seat. Congresswoman, we are in the process of developing a full suite of informational materials to assist businesses in. Crockett cut him off, her voice still calm but now with a sharp legal edge. That's not what I asked, Administrator. I'm not asking about your informational suite. I'm asking you, right now, as the head of the Small Business Administration, to explain one of those requirements to me. Let's take Section 4, subsection B, paragraph 3. It mandates a dynamic workforce contribution assessment. Can you explain, in simple terms, a mechanic or a baker could understand, what that is and how they're supposed to calculate it? The administrator stared back, a deer in the headlights. The room was silent. He knew the section she was talking about. His staff had flagged it as a nightmare of ambiguity. Well, Congresswoman, that's a highly technical provision. It involves a multi-factor analysis of employee productivity metrics against quarterly revenue streams. Our team is working on a fact sheet to clarify. So you can't explain it, Crockett stated flatly. It wasn't a question. The man whose entire job is to help small businesses cannot explain a key part of a law named the Corporate Freedom Act. How then, Administrator, is the owner of a small print shop in Dallas, who works 70 hours a week, supposed to understand it? The man who has to choose between spending his evening deciphering your multi-factor analysis or helping his daughter with her homework? The chairman started to fidget, sensing a loss of control. The gentlewoman's time is... Crockett ignored him. She held up a single sheet of paper, her gaze never leaving the flustered administrator. I'm not asking a hypothetical question, Mr. Thornton. Her voice dropped, losing its legal precision and gaining a low, simmering fire. I want to read you something. She held up the single sheet of paper, her gaze never leaving the flustered administrator. I'm not asking a hypothetical question, Mr. Thornton. Her voice dropped, losing its legal precision and gaining a low, simmering fire. I want to read you something. The chairman started to lean forward, his mouth opening to object, but she had already begun, and her voice filled the sudden, absolute silence of the room. This is a public post from a man in my district, Declan Hayes. He owns Lone Star Printworks. He wrote this 2 nights ago. She began to read from the page, her cadence slow, deliberate, each word given its proper weight. I haven't slept in 3 days. I'm not looking for sympathy. I just need to say this somewhere. I'm a small business owner. I have 8 employees. I print signs, banners, t-shirts. I love what I do. I'm a single dad. My daughter, Rowan, is my world. And I feel like I'm about to lose everything because I can't understand a form. Administrator Thornton, who had been trying to maintain a posture of bureaucratic authority, now looked down at his own perfectly manicured hands. He seemed to be studying his cuticles with intense interest. The C-SPAN camera, which had been on a wide shot of the committee, slowly zoomed in, framing Crockett from the chest up. She continued, her voice resonating with Declan's exhaustion. The Corporate Freedom Act was supposed to help us. That's what they said on the news. But my accountant just sent me the new quarterly compliance documents. It's 42 pages long. It wants to know the delineated workflow contribution percentage of each employee and requires a variable overhead cost projection that has to be updated monthly. If I get it wrong, the penalties are thousands of dollars. I've read it a dozen times. I called the helpline and was on hold for 2 hours before it disconnected. I can't afford a high-priced lawyer to decipher this for me. I just want to print t-shirts and pay my people and make sure my daughter has a roof over her head. A staffer in the back of the room, near the press corps, quietly flipped her laptop around to show her colleague the live feed. They watched, mesmerized. This was not the hearing they had expected. Crockett took a small breath and delivered the final lines of the post. This isn't freedom. This is a trap. I'm so tired." She placed the paper down gently on the dais in front of her. The silence in the room was no longer just quiet. It was heavy, filled with the ghost of one man's anxiety. She let the silence sit for a full 3 seconds before picking up a second sheet of paper. "That was Declan Hayes, from Dallas," she said, her voice a notch louder now. "That he is not alone. This is from Brielle Acosta, who owns a bakery in my district. She sent this to my office this morning." She read again. "My name is Brielle. I own a bakery. I have 1 full-time employee. I thought this new law didn't apply to me. I was wrong. Now I have to file a 12-page sole proprietor future earnings projection every 6 months. I used to spend my evenings trying to create new recipes for my customers. Now I spend them crying over IRS forms that I can't understand. I started this business to create things. This law is forcing me to become an accountant, and a bad one at that. Is this freedom?" The chairman finally found his voice, rapping his knuckles on the table. "Congresswoman Crockett, this is highly irregular. The witness is here to discuss the budget." Crockett did not even glance in his direction. She picked up a third sheet. "This is from Kenji Tanaka. He runs a 2-person IT support company out of his garage. He fixes computers for elderly people in his neighborhood." Her eyes scanned the room, meeting the gaze of several other committee members, who now looked as uncomfortable as Administrator Thornton. "The Corporate Freedom Act just forced me to spend $2,000 on a compliance consultant to make sure I filled out 1 new form correctly. That was my entire marketing budget for the rest of the year. That was the money I was going to use to print flyers to reach more seniors who need help. So tell me, how does that help me compete? How does that help me grow?" She put the 3rd page down on top of the others, creating a small stack of testimony. She then pushed the papers aside, leaned forward, and looked directly at Administrator Thornton, who finally lifted his head. His face was pale. "Administrator Thornton, these are the people you are sworn to protect. These are the businesses that form the backbone of our communities. They are not asking for a handout. They are asking for a chance. What they got instead was this." She gestured toward the stack of papers. "This isn't freedom. This is a paper and pencil nightmare engineered by the senator from Wyoming to benefit his corporate donors, while strangling the very people you work for." She locked eyes with him, and her voice, which had been rising with passion, softened into a point of piercing clarity. "My 5 minutes are almost up, so I will ask you one final question that doesn't require a fact sheet or a multi-factor analysis. It is the question Mr. Hayes is asking. It's the question Ms. Acosta is asking. It's the question Mr. Tanaka is asking, and thousands more like them who are too tired or too scared to even write it down." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "What are you, the head of the Small Business Administration, going to do about it?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. It was a perfect, unanswerable question. Thornton opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no answer. There was no bureaucratic language that could deflect the raw, human power of what had just happened. The chairman's gavel came down hard. "The gentlewoman's time has expired." That line of questioning was out of order. The witness is not required to comment on the legislative merits. But no one was listening to him. Crockett leaned back in her chair, her face a mask of calm composure. Her work was done. Reporters in the back were already on their feet, heading for the doors, furiously typing into their phones. The live feed was already being clipped. Her aide, Alani, standing against the back wall, met her boss's eyes and gave a single, slow nod. The hearing had been derailed. The narrative had been hijacked. Jasmine Crockett calmly gathered her 3 pieces of paper, placed them in her folder, and waited for the chaos to subside. She didn't have to wait long. As soon as the chairman called a brief recess, the room erupted. Crockett bypassed the scrum of aides and members, walking with purpose toward the exit. She was immediately intercepted by the small cluster of journalists who had been watching the feed from the hallway and had rushed to the door. "Congresswoman, do you have a comment on your exchange with Administrator Thornton?" asked a reporter from Politico. "Do you believe the SBA is failing small businesses?" shouted another. Crockett paused for a moment, a small island of calm in the swirling current of the hallway. "I think the testimony from my constituents speaks for itself," she said, her voice clear and firm. "I brought their words to this committee because they deserve to be heard. The Small Business Administration has a question to answer. I hope they take it seriously." She gave a polite nod and continued walking, leaving the reporters with a simple, powerful quote that required no further explanation. By the time she reached her office in the Rayburn House office building, the storm had already broken online. Alani had the screen of a large monitor on the wall tuned to a social media tracker. It was a cascade of red and blue, a torrent of posts and shares and comments. The clip of her 5-minute questioning was the top video on nearly every platform. The hashtag paper and pencil nightmare was climbing the trending charts. The posts weren't just from political junkies. They were from welders in Ohio, coffee shop owners in Oregon, florists in Florida. They were sharing their own stories of bureaucratic frustration, of feeling small and unheard. Declan Hayes' original post was being shared thousands of times a minute, his tired, anxious words now a national rallying cry. Memes were already appearing. The official, smiling portrait of Senator John Barrasso next to a picture of a person buried under a mountain of paper, with the caption, "Corporate Freedom." In his sprawling, mahogany-paneled office in the Russell Senate office building, Senator John Barrasso was not smiling. His communications director, a man with a perpetually worried expression, stood silently as the senator watched the clip on a tablet propped up on his massive desk. He watched Crockett read the posts, his jaw clenching tighter with every word. He saw the memes. He saw his name attached to the phrase, "paper and pencil nightmare." He swiped the video off the screen and placed the tablet face down on the desk with a sharp rap. "Who is this woman?" he snapped, the question rhetorical. He knew who she was. A freshman rep, a progressive firebrand. Insignificant, until now. This is amateur hour. She's grandstanding, taking a complex piece of economic policy completely out of context for a cheap soundbite. "The soundbite is playing very well, Senator," the comms director said cautiously. "The phrase, paper and pencil nightmare is resonating." Resonating with who? People who don't understand economics? Barrasso stood up and began to pace behind his desk. He was a man used to controlling the narrative, to operating in the refined worlds of policy and high finance. This was a street fight, and it offended his sensibilities. "This is an attack on free enterprise, plain and simple. She's an anti-business radical trying to score points with her socialist base. That's the narrative. Get our people on the networks. Push back. Hard. I will not be defined by some backbencher from Texas reading sob stories." He was confident he could crush this. It was a matter of applying superior force, of framing the debate in his terms. He completely misread the moment, seeing a political attack to be countered, not a human story to be understood. Back in Jasmine Crockett's office, the adrenaline had finally worn off. She closed the door, shutting out the ringing phones and the excited chatter of her staff. She sank into the worn armchair in the corner, the one with the slightly frayed arms, and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 3 days. The bone-deep exhaustion of the high-stakes performance washed over her. It was the same feeling she used to get after a long, grueling day in court, after leaving every ounce of her energy and intellect on the courtroom floor fighting for a client. Alani came in quietly and placed a bottle of water and a tablet on the small table beside her. "It's working," Alani whispered, a note of awe in her voice. "It's really working." Crockett picked up the tablet and scrolled. She saw the messages of support, the shared stories, the thousands of people who felt seen and heard for the first time. It was gratifying, but it was also heavy. Each post, each message, was another person pinning their hopes on her. She had started this. She had taken Declan Hayes' quiet cry of despair and turned it into a national headline. Now she had a responsibility to see it through. Of this, the fight had just begun, and she could already feel the weight of the coming storm. The weight of the day settled in, with the evening shadows that crept across Jasmine Crockett's office. The initial adrenaline of the fight had been replaced by the low thrum of a marathoner settling in for the long miles ahead. On the large monitor on her wall, the cable news channels had carved the nation into two distinct realities. On one network, a panel of commentators lauded her as a modern-day folk hero, a voice for the voiceless, who had exposed the hollow promise of trickle-down economics. On another, Senator Barrasso's chosen surrogates were on the offensive. A slick lobbyist in an expensive suit described her as an economic illiterate. A conservative pundit called her 5-minute questioning a disgraceful, emotionally manipulative stunt. The battle lines were no longer just on social media. They were being etched into the national consciousness in prime time. Senator John Barrasso himself appeared on the highest-rated conservative talk show that night. He was the picture of calm authority, the seasoned physician patiently explaining a complex diagnosis to a frantic family. He never once uttered Crockett's name, a calculated move to diminish her status. He referred to her only as "my colleague from Texas," or, more dismissively, "the gentlewoman." "Look," Barrasso said, leaning forward with an air of paternalistic reason, "running a successful, modern economy is a complex business. The legislation we passed is designed to streamline things for the major drivers of that economy. Of course, there will be new frameworks to learn. Some people, when faced with a challenge, prefer to complain rather than compete. They find it easier to find an anecdote, a sob story, to avoid the hard work of adaptation." The host nodded sympathetically. "So this idea of a paper and pencil nightmare, it's a complete mischaracterization," Barrasso interjected smoothly. "It's an emotional argument designed to bypass a logical one. The broader data, not the hand-picked anecdotes, show that this bill will unleash trillions in economic activity. My focus is on the health of the entire system, not on one or two people who are struggling with a new form." He sat back, the image complete. He was the serious man of science and data, and she was the hysterical woman of feelings and anecdotes. The impact of his words, amplified by the network's powerful megaphone, was immediate. The trickle of hateful messages into Crockett's office became a flood. Alani, her face grim, brought her a printout of the evening summary from the district office's voicemail system and email inbox. For every 5 messages of heartfelt thanks from a struggling entrepreneur, there was one dripping with venom. The words, echoing Barrasso's talking points, were ugly and personal. "Socialist job killer. Go back to the courtroom, you don't understand business." Mixed in were the darker threats, laced with racism and misogyny that had become a sickeningly common feature of her public life. The messages were no longer abstract political disagreements. They were specific. "We know which street you live on. You'd better watch your back in Dallas. A pretty face like yours shouldn't be talking about things it doesn't understand." They were designed to do one thing: instill fear. Later that night, as she was finally packing her bag to leave the office, her personal cell phone rang. The caller ID showed her mother's name. She took a deep breath before answering, consciously smoothing the tension from her voice. "Hey, Mom," she said, trying to sound casual. "Jasmine, are you okay?" Her mother's voice was tight with worry. "I saw you on the news. The clip was wonderful, honey. I was so proud. But then, I saw the other channel, the things that senator was saying about you, and I made the mistake of looking at the comments online." Her mother's voice cracked. "The things they're writing," bearing in hand. "Are you safe? Do you have security?" This was the part of the job that never got easier. The political slings and arrows were one thing. The fear they caused her family was another. "I'm fine, Mom. Really," she lied, forcing a light tone. "It's just politics. They're just words. Don't you worry about me. You know I can handle myself. We're doing the right thing, and that's all that matters." They talked for a few more minutes about family matters. The conversation, a deliberate dance around the ugly reality of the situation. After she hung up, Crockett stood in the silent office for a long moment, The mask of the strong daughter slipped away. She locked the door behind her and walked through the quiet, cavernous hallways of the Capitol, feeling the weight of her mother's fear like a physical presence beside her. The threats were just words, she had said. But words had power. They could inspire, and they could incite. She was feeling the full force of both. Miles away, in Dallas, Declan Hayes was proving her point. He was at Lone Star Printworks late into the night. The rhythmic hum of the big carousel screen printer a familiar comfort. He was trying to catch up on an order of t-shirts for a local charity run, but his focus was shot. His phone, which he'd set to silent hours ago, was a constant, vibrating presence on his workbench. All day, it had been a relentless stream of notifications. Friends from high school, distant cousins, former customers, all of them sending him links to the C-SPAN clip. Finally, he wiped the ink from his hands and watched it. He saw Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a woman he'd only ever seen on TV, reading his words. The words he had typed in the lonely, pre-dawn hours, fueled by caffeine and despair. Hearing them spoken with such force and clarity in the halls of power was a surreal, dizzying experience. He felt a surge of vindication, a profound relief that he wasn't screaming into the void. But it was followed by a wave of pure terror. His name, his business, his daughter. He was exposed. Reporters from local news channels, and even one from a national paper, had been calling his shop all day. He had ignored every call, his heart pounding each time the phone rang. He wasn't a political person. He was just a guy trying to run a business. Later, he went home and tucked his 8-year-old daughter, Rowan, into bed. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Daddy, my friend Chloe said you were on TV. Are you famous now?" Declan smoothed her hair back from her forehead. He managed a small, tired smile. "No, sweetie, I'm not famous," he said softly. It turns out someone was listening, that's all." He kissed her goodnight and stood in her doorway for a long time. The simple reality of her safety and his love for her cutting through the noise of the day. Someone was listening. He wasn't sure yet if that was a good thing or a bad thing. The news cycle churned on for the next 2 days, settling into a predictable, grinding stalemate. The country was divided into 2 camps. In one, Jasmine Crockett was a champion of the people. In the other, she was a dangerous radical. And John Barrasso was the valiant defender of capitalism. The narrative was stuck in the mud of partisan trench warfare. Crockett's office continued to field the dual waves of support and threats. Barrasso's team continued to book him on friendly networks, where he could repeat his talking points about anecdotes versus data without challenge. The hashtag paper and pencil nightmare hashtag was still active, but it was being countered by a new one. Hashtag Crockett kills jobs, pushed by a network of conservative bot accounts. Crockett knew she was at a tipping point. The story was starting to fade, to become just another partisan squabble that most of America would tune out. She needed something to break the logjam, to elevate the debate beyond a simple he said, she said. Help was about to come from the most unexpected of places. On Friday morning, Warren Blackwood published his weekly syndicated column. Blackwood was a titan of old-school conservative commentary, a libertarian-leaning intellectual. He had spent 50 years writing about the virtues of the free market, fiscal discipline, and small government. He was revered in Republican circles, a man whose words could make or break a political career on the right. He was, by all accounts, the exact kind of person who should have been leading the charge in support of Senator Barrasso. The column landed online at 6 a.m. The headline was a bombshell. Senator Barrasso is right about freedom and wrong about everything else. Alani was the first to see it. She read it, then read it again, her eyes wide with disbelief. She printed it out and walked into Crockett's office without knocking. "You have to read this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Now." Crockett took the paper and began to read. Blackwood's column started, as expected, with a defense of deregulation as a core principle of economic liberty. But then, in the third paragraph, It pivoted sharply. "The senator from Wyoming speaks eloquently about the need to free our enterprises from the shackles of government," Blackwood wrote. "On this, he and I agree, but the legislation he has championed does not, in practice, do that. Instead, it has created a two-tiered system that is the very antithesis of a free and fair market. It has handed a gift to the largest corporations, who have armies of lawyers and accountants to navigate any complexity, while laying a field of regulatory landmines for the small business owner." Crockett's heart began to beat faster. "I have read the now famous post by Mr. Declan Hayes of Dallas," the column continued. "I have also read the text of the Corporate Freedom Act, and I am forced to conclude that the outrage of the gentlewoman from Texas, while perhaps stylistically different from my own, is substantively correct. A law that a small business owner cannot understand without hiring an expensive consultant is not a law that promotes freedom. It is a tool of suppression, a barrier to entry that protects the powerful from the competition of the nimble and the new. This is not capitalism, it is cronyism, wrapped in the flag of deregulation." Blackwood concluded with a devastating blow. "Senator Barrasso is a physician. He should know better than anyone that a medicine that cures one patient but sickens 100 others is not a cure. It is a poison. The anxiety felt by Mr. Hayes is not an anecdote. It is a symptom of a deeply flawed law. True conservatism should seek to simplify, to clarify, to make it easier for any American with a good idea and a strong work ethic to succeed. This law does the opposite. It must be revisited." The column was a political earthquake. It shattered the carefully constructed partisan frame. It wasn't a Democrat attacking a Republican anymore. It was a respected conservative icon calling out one of his own. Not on partisan grounds, but on principle. In Barrasso's office, a stunned silence gave way to frantic, panicked phone calls. In Crockett's office, there was a different kind of silence. The stunned, hopeful silence of a new path forward suddenly blown wide open. The game had just changed completely. The silence in Senator Barrasso's office was heavier and more oppressive than the thick mahogany paneling. Warren Blackwood's column was displayed on every screen, a verdict delivered from their own side. The communications director, who just 2 days ago had been confidently planning a counteroffensive, now stared at the screen as if it were a death warrant. The anti-business radical narrative had been surgically dismantled by a man they couldn't attack. Attacking Warren Blackwood in conservative circles would be like attacking the concept of gravity. "What do we do?" the aide asked, his voice barely audible. Barrasso stood staring out his window at the distant dome of the Capitol. His fury from the night before had cooled into something far more dangerous. The cold, bitter anger of a man who has been publicly outmaneuvered. He was trapped. "Get me a list," he said, his voice low and tight. "A list of every business in Wyoming that has benefited from this bill. I want numbers. I want data. We will bury them in data. We will argue facts until this emotional nonsense dies down." He was doubling down on the very strategy that had failed him, unable or unwilling to see that the fight was no longer about data. It was about people. His office, once a bastion of confident power, now felt like a bunker under siege. The media, smelling blood in the water, went into a frenzy. The story was no longer a simple partisan spat. It was a schism in the conservative movement, a debate over the very soul of Republican economic policy. The producers of the Sunday morning talk shows, the high church of American political discourse, were engaged in a fierce bidding war. They all wanted the same 3 guests: Jasmine Crockett, John Barrasso, and the man who had set the world on fire, Warren Blackwood. In Crockett's office, the atmosphere was electric. Alani was pacing with a phone glued to her ear, fielding offers. "CNN wants you for a town hall. NBC is offering the top of Meet the Press." Crockett, however, was an island of calm. She saw the trap in the frantic media cycle. A victory could be easily squandered by overexposure, by getting dragged back into a shouting match. "Turn them all down," she said quietly. Alani stopped pacing. "What? All of them?" "Jasmine, this is our moment." "No," Crockett corrected her gently. "This is Mr. Blackwood's moment. Let him have it. Let his words sink in. Let Barrasso's office panic and make a mistake. We'll stay quiet. We'll let the column do the work." She leaned back in her chair, her legal instincts taking over. "We don't talk again until we have a specific solution to offer. Right now, we're the critics. This weekend, we become the architects." Her decision proved to be a stroke of genius. On Sunday morning, Warren Blackwood appeared on Meet the Press. He was everything Barrasso was not: calm, thoughtful, and principled. The host immediately tried to frame the story as a personal feud. Quote, "Blackwood, you and Senator Barrasso have been allies for years. What prompted such a sharp, public break?" Blackwood refused the bait, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "This isn't personal, and it isn't a break," he said, his voice the steady, reassuring tone of a beloved professor. "It's a discussion of first principles. The Republican Party I have been a member of for my entire adult life believes in the power and ingenuity of the individual. We believe in fair competition on a level playing field. This bill, as written, does not create a level playing field. It creates a tiered system that favors corporate bureaucracy over individual enterprise." Congresswoman Crockett, regardless of her party affiliation, correctly identified the human cost of that fundamental mistake. The issue isn't her, the issue is the bill. His performance was a masterclass in intellectual integrity. He had effectively taken the grenade Crockett had thrown and detonated it inside the Republican Party's own headquarters. The narrative was now completely reshaped. By Monday morning, Jasmine Crockett knew it was time. She had spent the entire weekend with her legislative team, drafting, refining, and simplifying. She didn't call a press conference at the Capitol. She didn't book a slot on a cable news show. She flew home to Dallas. The press conference was held at the Daily Need, Brielle Acosta's small bakery in the Bishop Arts District. The location was a powerful statement in itself. Instead of the cold marble of Washington, Crockett was surrounded by the warm smell of yeast and sugar, the clatter of baking sheets, and the whir of an espresso machine. Brielle stood beside her, looking nervous but resolute. Crockett stepped up to the single microphone, set up between a pastry case and a chalk-drawn menu. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying easily in the small space. "I want to thank Brielle for allowing us to be here today. This is what it's all about. Not abstract economic theory, but this. A place where someone turned a dream into a reality, where people from the neighborhood can come together." She looked into the cameras. "Last week in Washington, a conversation started. It started because people like Brielle and like Declan Hayes had the courage to speak up about a law that was causing them more anxiety than opportunity. I want to thank them. I also want to thank Mr. Warren Blackwood for his intellectual honesty and his courage to put principle over party." She paused, letting the weight of that acknowledgement settle. But identifying a problem is only the first step. Today, I want to talk about the solution." She held up a single sheet of paper. "My office has drafted a new piece of legislation. We're calling it the Small Business Clarity Act. It's not a complicated bill. In fact, it's very simple. It repeals the confusing, burdensome, and unnecessary sections of the Corporate Freedom Act and replaces them with this: a single-page, plain English compliance form for any business with 50 or fewer employees. We designed it using the feedback from the very people who have to fill it out." She held the page up for the cameras to see. It was clean, with simple checkboxes and clear instructions. A law that is supposed to help people should not require a law degree to understand. Good governance isn't about complexity, it's about clarity. It is not about helping the biggest players navigate the rules. It's about making the rules fair and accessible for everyone who wants to compete. Then, she delivered the final, powerful move. It was not an attack, but an invitation. "I am sending a copy of this draft to the office of Senator John Barrasso this morning, and I invite the senator from Wyoming, as a fellow public servant and as a physician sworn to the principle of first, do no harm, to work with me. Let's fix this together. Let's pass a bill that actually provides American businesses with freedom, not fear." The move was brilliant. It framed her as a constructive, bipartisan legislator. not just a partisan bomb thrower. It offered her antagonist a graceful way out, while simultaneously putting all the pressure on him to accept it. The ball was now squarely in his court. The national conversation pivoted instantly. News headlines were no longer about the fight. They were about the Small Business Clarity Act. Crockett's simple, one-page solution was a powerful visual, easily understood by everyone. In Washington, the tide began to turn. Several moderate Republican senators, who had been privately uneasy with Barrasso's bill but were afraid to speak out against their leadership, now saw an opening. Citing Blackwood's column and Crockett's constructive proposal, they began to publicly express concerns. The pressure on Barrasso was no longer coming from the left, but from the center and from within his own party. His bunker was beginning to crumble from the inside. In his print shop in Dallas, Declan Hayes watched the press conference stream on his laptop, the sounds of the bakery in the background mixing with the whir of his own machines. He saw Brielle Acosta, a woman he'd never met but whose story he now knew, standing next to the congresswoman. He saw the single sheet of paper she held up. He saw his own quiet, desperate words, posted in the dead of night, transformed into a tangible, hopeful reality. The fear that had been a cold knot in his stomach for a week began to loosen. It was replaced by something new, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. A sense of agency. He had spent his life keeping his head down, working hard, and trying to stay out of the way. He believed, like many, that politics was something that happened to him, not something he could influence. He was wrong. He looked around his shop, at the stacks of t-shirts and the half-finished banners. He thought of his daughter, Rowan. He thought about the kind of world he wanted her to grow up in, one where she felt her voice mattered. He sat down at his computer and logged back into Facebook. His hands were shaking slightly as he started to type. But this time, it wasn't from anxiety. It was from purpose. "Hi everyone," he wrote. "My name is Declan Hayes. A lot of you have seen my name in the news lately. It's been a strange week. But I saw something today that made me realize that when we speak up, people listen. And when they listen, things can change. Congresswoman Crockett has proposed a solution called the Small Business Clarity Act. I think we, the people who actually have to live with these laws, should have a say in it. So, I've reserved a room at the Oak Cliff Community Center for next Tuesday night at 7 p.m. If you're a small business owner who is tired of feeling buried and ignored, please come. Let's talk about this proposal. Let's figure out how to make it better. Let's make sure our voices are part of the solution." He stared at the post for a long minute. He was terrified, but he hit publish anyway. He was no longer just a victim of a broken system. He was becoming an architect of its repair. The Oak Cliff Community Center buzzed with an energy Declan Hayes had never experienced before. He had booked a room that could hold 30 people, secretly terrified that only 5 would show up. But by 10 minutes to 7, every one of the 30 chairs was filled. By 7 o'clock, people were standing against the back wall, and more were trickling in. He saw Brielle Acosta from the bakery arrive with 2 other local shop owners. He saw Kenji Tanaka, the IT guy, setting up his own laptop to take notes. There were men and women of all ages and backgrounds. A woman who ran a landscaping business. A young couple who owned a food truck. An older man who had a small plumbing company. The local news affiliate had sent a camera crew, who were setting up discreetly in the back. The room was a perfect cross-section of Dallas's entrepreneurial spirit, and they were all here because of him. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. His hand shook as he walked to the front of the room and stood behind a wobbly folding table. He looked out at the sea of expectant faces. Hi," he began, his voice cracking. "Thanks for coming. I'm Declan Hayes. I guess you know that." A few people chuckled, and it loosened the knot in his chest. "I'm not a public speaker. I'm a printer. I felt like we needed to talk. About this law, about the new proposal, about what we want." What happened next was remarkable. There was no grandstanding, no angry speeches. One by one, people stood up and told their stories. They talked about the confusing forms, the hours spent on hold with the IRS, the fear of making a mistake that could cost them their livelihood. But then, the conversation shifted. They started talking about Crockett's Clarity Act. Kenji Tanaka stood up. "The one-page idea is great, but we need an online portal, a simple one. That saves your progress. That works on a mobile phone." The room murmured in agreement. Brielle Acosta suggested a dedicated SBA helpline for the new form, staffed by people who could actually answer questions in plain English. The plumber suggested that the penalties for a first-time, good-faith error should be a warning, not a fine. Declan, forgetting his nervousness, grabbed a marker and started writing the suggestions down on a large whiteboard he had brought from his shop. The board quickly filled up with practical, common-sense ideas. It was a masterclass in grassroots democracy, happening in real time. In the back of the room, Alani, Crockett's aide, watched it all, her pen flying across her notepad. She wasn't there as a representative of the government. She was there as a student, learning from the experts. As the meeting wound down, Alani stepped forward. "On behalf of Congresswoman Crockett, I just want to thank every single one of you," she said, her voice filled with genuine respect. "She wanted me to be here tonight not to talk, but to listen. And I can promise you that every idea on this whiteboard will be delivered to her desk tomorrow morning. You are all a part of this process." The room broke into applause. For the first time, for many in that room, the government didn't feel like a distant, oppressive force. It felt like an institution that might actually be listening. The clips from that community meeting were the final blow to Senator Barrasso's crumbling defense. The images were devastatingly effective. Not angry protesters, but earnest, hard-working business owners. The very people his party claimed to champion, collaborating to fix a broken law. The pressure became unbearable. The calls from donors were no longer supportive. They were demanding. The whispers from his Republican colleagues became direct conversations in the Senate cloakroom. "John, you need to resolve this. It's making us all look bad." 2 days after the Dallas meeting, Senator Barrasso sat in his office, the fight gone from his eyes. He looked out the window, at the same view of the Capitol, but saw it differently now. He saw it not as his kingdom, but as a place of brutal, unforgiving politics. He had lost. He had tried to fight a human story with data, and the story had won. He turned to his chief of staff, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Call Congresswoman Crockett's office," he said, the words tasting like ash. Tell them the senator is willing to discuss the Congresswoman's proposal." 2 weeks later, an awkward but civil joint press conference was held in a neutral meeting room in the Capitol. Jasmine Crockett and John Barrasso stood at the same podium, a carefully choreographed picture of bipartisanship. They announced they had reached a compromise. An amendment, incorporating the core principles of the Small Business Clarity Act and the suggestions from the Dallas meeting, would be introduced to the original law. Barrasso spoke first, his words stiff and formal. He spoke of the importance of listening to the concerns of the small business community and finding common-sense solutions. He never admitted fault, but in the world of Washington, his presence at that podium was a clear signal of surrender. Then, Crockett spoke. She was gracious, thanking the senator for his willingness to find common ground for the good of the American people. But she quickly shifted the focus. "While I appreciate the senator's collaboration," she said, looking directly into the cameras, "the true authors of this amendment are not in this room. They are people like Brielle Acosta, who closes up her bakery long after dark. They are people like Kenji Tanaka, who makes house calls to help our seniors with their computers. And they are people like Declan Hayes, who had the courage to tell his story and remind us all that our voices matter. This victory does not belong to any politician. It belongs to them." 1 month after he first sat down at his computer and typed out his desperate, sleepless message, Declan Hayes was back at his desk at Lone Star Printworks. The rhythmic hum of his machines was the same, But everything else felt different. Taped to the wall next to a crayon drawing from his daughter was a printed copy of the press release announcing the passage of the bipartisan amendment. He had finished his quarterly compliance paperwork the night before. It had taken him 15 minutes. He was clearing out his email inbox when a new message popped up. The subject line read, "Question from a fellow business owner." He opened it. It was from a woman in rural Nebraska. "Dear Mr. Hayes," it began, "my name is Sarah. I own a small organic farm with my husband. I saw your story on the news, and I was so inspired. We are dealing with a state water rights regulation here that is just as confusing and damaging as the law you fought. It's designed for massive corporate farms, and it's crushing small family operations like ours. I want to organize the other farmers in my area, but I have no idea where to start. You managed to get people in Washington to listen. How did you do it? Any advice you could offer would be a godsend." A slow smile spread across Declan's face. He thought back to the fear, the anxiety, the feeling of being utterly powerless. Then he thought of the packed community center, the feeling of shared purpose, the knowledge that he had made a difference. He cracked his knuckles and began to type a reply. "Dear Sarah," he wrote, "thank you for reaching out. I'm no expert, but I can tell you what I learned. It starts with telling your story as clearly and honestly as you can. Then you find the others who are living the same story. You get together, you listen to each other, you write down your solutions, and you don't stop talking, you don't stop organizing, and you don't stop believing that you have a right to be heard. It's scary at first, but you'd be surprised who is listening." He hit send. The echo of a single act of courage in Washington hadn't just changed a law. It had empowered a citizen who was now teaching another citizen how to find her own voice. The work went on. What do you think is the most powerful tool for change? A politician's platform or an ordinary citizen's story? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the people behind the headlines.